Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Tech Beats Unplugged, the podcast where we groove into the latest tech trends and vibe with the flow of cloud possibilities. I'm your host, Kosseila, aka Cloud Dude, and I'm pumped to be here with y'all. Alright folks, today's show is all about shaking things up in the cloud world. Now imagine starting a company at a time where the internet was still a distant concept for most people, and growing it into one of the top hosting providers in the UK, before expanding it into data centers, fiber networks, security solutions, you name it. Our guest today isn't just any tech entrepreneur, he's a serial entrepreneur and cloud disruptor who's taking in on the giants of the cloud space with his latest cloud venture named CIVO. And by the way, they've just been named Cloud Vendor of the Year in Computing UK's Cloud Excellence Awards. And he's got a lot to say about what's broken in the cloud industry and more importantly, how to fix it. My guest is no other than Mr. Mark Boost, CEO and founder of CIVO Cloud. Hey Mark, and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's really great to be here.
My pleasure, Mark, and glad to have you with us. How you doing, my friend?
Yeah, good. Yeah, we were just catching up on the exchanging weather from Canada and the UK. I think it sounds like we're on similar weather traits at the moment.
Yeah, sounds like it. But you should come back in January. We'll have a whole different conversation. I promise. Okay, first, as a usual icebreaker in this podcast, I would like to ask, who is Mark Boost? Could you tell us more about you and how did you get started in the tech industry and what inspired that young man from the UK to build his first company in the late 90s, far from the Silicon Valley and way before the internet bubble? Could you share more about your journey with us?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I guess it really started, I can remember from maybe about 10 years old. And
okay.
my father was a computer programmer and he brought home a very basic IBM style computer. I used to have a green screen. It was before even having hard disks, and you had like floppy disks. If anyone remembers, not the 3.5, it was the 5.25.
Yeah.
Real floppy disks. And yeah, I remember being fascinated in him bringing these computers home. He taught me quite early on in my childhood, some basic programming and how to almost just create a very basic game or something on this kind of green screen, that kind of stuff. And I think I didn't get really, really interested in it until he brought back a modem one day. And I was probably about 12 years old at this point. And I was really fascinated by the fact that you could connect one computer to another computer that could be anywhere else, in the world. Or at that time, it was mainly connecting to another computer in the same country. But because the phone bills were so big back then, to actually international dialing and all those kind of things. But that's when I really got interested. And I actually set up a bulletin board, which was, for anyone who doesn't know, this was the very early stage before the internet. And,
I see.
And the bulletin board was a piece of software you could install and actually run your own kind of mini intranet, if you like, that people could actually log on to.
Interesting.
And, exchange messages, could chat to people, could download freeware, play online games, stuff like that.
Cool.
And you could dial into these different bulletin boards that existed. And I decided that, I wanted to build my own bulletin board. I managed to persuade my parents that, to get a second phone line because, we needed a clear phone line and not block the phone line.
Oh, of course.
And I was able to build this bulletin board where people could log on. And I remember that, I guess that's where my entrepreneurism kind of started because I set up a subscription for it and I actually only ever got 4 subscriptions. I think most people felt sorry for me because they probably knew I was young and wanted to kind of like, reward, my efforts in that kind of way. Maybe it was even family, friends making donations that my parents didn't tell me about or something. But I got 4 subscriptions for like
nice
£5 a year,
Cool.
I kind of kept that going for a few years, and that's really where I got started. But what actually happened from then, I got interested in motor racing, and I actually embarked on a motor racing career. And this started with go-karting and kart racing around the UK. And within a few years, I finished second in the British Championships and then moved into car racing.
What?
And worked my way up various different formulas all the way to Formula 3, which was really one step from Formula 1
Wow,
at that time.
That's
so
sick.
And I raced against a lot of the drivers that ended up in Formula 1, but unfortunately I didn't have the sponsorship and the budget to kind of keep going, because until you get to the very top, you have to pay your way to get there. And
it's very common.
We just couldn't get the sponsorships for us. So I had to call it a day, really. And once that chapter had closed, that was really the start of my next chapter. I thought, this time I'm about 19 years old. I don't know what to do.
Oh, man.
And really at that point, I fell back on my youth and the IT and computers and modems. And the internet was just starting to evolve at that point. So it seemed like a natural thing to me to say, the internet's coming along. I should get involved with, starting an internet company.
Nice.
And that originally started with web design. And I was designing websites for people. I sort of self-taught myself, HTML and CSS and those kind of things. And you may remember there was packages at the time, things like originally Microsoft Front Page. There was Dream.
Yeah. I remember. Front Page, 𝗰𝗵𝗹𝗆.
Yeah, and Dreamweaver was quite powerful actually, but Front Page not so much. But they were the start of it, and then that kind of evolved. A bit more hand coding beyond that and things. And I was building these websites, and that was really where it started. But I always believed that the first business that I founded, that we should offer the complete service. If someone came to us for a website, then we should also offer to host the website. We should also offer to provide the domain name for them.
Exactly.
So I made sure that we had these extra services available. And then it got to the point where we were hosting websites for our web design customers, and we were also registering the domain names. And I thought, well, we're doing this anyway. Why don't we set up a domain name web hosting company on the site?
Yeah.
And
from a registrar.
Yeah, and that's where LCM, my kind of first proper business, started. And after about 6 months, I stopped doing all the web design. And because the domain name and the web hosting was one, it was far easier and it was more scalable because, me on my own, I could only do so much as a web designer. How many sites can I build?
Sure. Yeah.
Whereas an online business, selling domain names repetitively and hosting websites, you could scale a lot further. So that was the very start of it. But I guess back to your original question, it was really my dad's involvement with programming those early stage bulletin boards and modems that really got me excited about the future of tech.
Wow. What an amazing story. I didn't know. So you went from the crazy world of fast tracks in Formula 3 to join the high wave broadband internet?
Yeah, definitely.
Is that it?
There's a lot of lessons I learned as well, I think, that I've taken forward from the motor racing into business. And I think a lot of what drives me in business is my competitive spirit, to really push the limits and really take things as far as I possibly can. Just to challenge myself in that respect and prove to myself that I can succeed in the various things that the goals that I set and things. Right.
Totally get it. Very inspiring indeed. This is actually a perfect segue for my next question, because with all the accomplishment in your career of entrepreneur, what's the biggest lesson you learned from scaling many companies? And do you have any advice for new tech founders wanting to disrupt the incumbents? Did you have to pivot or always stuck to your guns?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, I've always stuck to my guns, and I felt like I've had a vision and I should stick to it and see it out. And with that said, I just mentioned that I started out as a web design company with the first company and then ended up being a hosting company.
Yeah.
And I think there's always a point where, if things aren't working, you've got to recognize that earlier enough to make sure, especially if, cash is everything, isn't it? You burn too much cash and then before you know it, it's too late. You've got to learn when to pivot.
Yeah.
But I also think, I believe if you really, really believe in your vision, and it's something, and I certainly feel that's where we are with CIVO now. We really believe that the cloud needs to change, which I'm sure we'll come on to. But we've got to be really adamant about sticking to your guns and going the whole way. You can't deviate from that. So I think I generally haven't pivoted, but I have done it once. In particular, with most of the other companies I've founded, as you mentioned, I kind of started in domains and hosting. I moved into data centers. I was then involved in a network company that was putting fiber in the ground, and then on to cybersecurity, and then back to my roots in hosting with setting up CIVO. And really CIVO was the evolution of the work that I'd already started in LCM.
I see. But
felt at the time, because we were never VC backed, or we were never private equity backed or anything, it was all organically grown. I sold that business in 2019 and really used the money from that to say, I want to continue the vision that I had within CIVO. And with the money that we'd actually got from the sale, we were able to put that to good use to really build the product that we wanted. Whereas LCN, we're always a follower and not a leader. And I always wanted us to be innovators and leaders in that way. And I think what we've done with CIVO is to really, say, have the cash behind us to actually go after our vision,
True. Right. So you've kept that same vision throughout the years, but that didn't make you an inflexible person because you still had all those ventures. We can't say you were rigid, though. There's flexibility between hosting, fiber, cybersecurity, and CIVO. Do you call those pivots?
I think I wouldn't say they were pivots. Those companies were more opportunities. Some people have said to me, why didn't you run all these companies under one brand? But I've always been a believer in that a company should almost do one thing. And so when I started to get involved in data centers, it felt like it needed its own company that focused and was a specialist on data centers. It wasn't a domain name, hosting, and a data center company that is kind of almost a jack of all trades but master of none. And then when I started the cybersecurity, it was actually born out of the data center company of offering extra levels of cybersecurity for people. But then it felt it was going to do better with a dedicated focus on cybersecurity and being a specialist on cybersecurity. So I always believed in creating brands for products rather than have them all under one with lots and lots and lots of products.
I see.
So I think that's the reason I set up these different companies. They could have all been run as just a tech company with multiple arms. But my belief was to have a brand that was really focused and all the messaging or everything around it, all your USPs and things are geared around products.
True. I mean, of course, there are some companies that do that. When you hear about Toshiba, they have like so many industries, they fall under the same group or consortium. But like in your case, it didn't really make sense to have so many, I'd say, spaces or fields under the same umbrella, right?
Yeah, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to this. I think it's a personal preference. It doesn't mean the other way can't work. And there's plenty of examples that it does work. But I think it's proven to be very successful for me when, because sometimes you can have, let's say, data centers is a good example, data center company that sells space in a data center, connectivity, power, and then a cybersecurity company that's, more, we were doing a lot of penetration testing and ethical hacking and red teaming, and that's very different from a data center company. How you communicate those two things within one brand is difficult. They're completely different. So for me, it felt like the right approach. I'm sure there's lots of companies that have proven to make it work. But when you come to market things, and you can only have one homepage, can't you? And on that homepage, you can only have so much real estate,
of course,
for a product. Are you going to lead with this product or that product or the one after? So I just felt as a brand, you focus on that one product, and that served us very well. But go back to your question about pivoting as well. I like to think of things as sometimes mini pivots. It's not like we completely switched it up and started offering a service, but I do think along that journey in every one of my companies, there's things that we've made, there's tweaks that we've made along that journey that have been...
Like you adapt.
Yeah, that have, maybe we've said, like, as an example, you might launch a product and say, well, this product is focused on SMEs. Then you find out that actually it really sells well to enterprises. So you then pivot and you say, okay, well, all our marketing, all our messaging now is going to change to enterprises.
Yeah.
I haven't changed the product. It's still the same.
Of course.
It was a mini pivot in that way. So sometimes I'd almost advise people, like, you don't have to rip up the whole business plan
and start from scratch. Yeah.
But again, sometimes you just have to tweak a few things here and there. And I guess people talk about sometimes failing fast, don't they? And trying to, again, if you're kind of bootstrapped, you've only got so much cash.
Yeah.
You don't want to go through so many iterations,
True.
especially over a long period. You've got to find your pathway pretty quickly. So that fail fast is, especially for a startup that's bootstrapped, is quite important. So finding those mini pivots along that journey is quite important.
Yeah. Makes total sense. And just to finish this point, while you were adapting or micro pivoting during your career as an entrepreneur, how do you approach competition? Are you totally ignorant to the noise, or you keep an eye on them every now and then? How does that work?
I think a bit of both. I've never been fearful of the competition. I think that comes back to my racing days, that I have self-belief. I feel we can take the competition on. I feel we're good at, thinking of things differently, trying to innovate, those kind of things. I think we can carve out our own space and our own, unique way of doing things. But I think it's also important with any business, you need to understand who your competitors are. I think you need to understand their strengths and weaknesses, and be aware of, pricing structures and all the different things that kind of play into it. And because you've got to make a decision of, how you position your product. Mm-hmm. You've got to, again, how you position it, what audience are you focusing at, what pricing strategies you're going to use. You've got to at least evaluate the competition first. But I think I am a great believer in, once you've got a clear path, it's just focusing on it and ignoring the competition and carrying on with what you believe is right. Unless you are getting signals that it's wrong, this is not working, this is not. If you're getting that consistently, then something must be wrong. Mm-hmm. You can't be too naive and just ignore and go, aimlessly after a goal and all the signals you're getting are bad. I mean, it's important, obviously, to test things.
Yeah.
We did a lot of beta testing, and I'm a great believer in feedback. I also spend a lot of my time, even now as a CEO, I talk to lots of customers.
Nice.
And that's not just the bigger customers. You'll find me in our Slack channels talking to our newest customers, our smallest customers, the hobbyists. Mm-hmm. My DMs on Twitter are open. I talk to lots of people. And I think it's important as a business grows that, that the leadership doesn't come too far removed from the customer. So you have that empathy, the challenges they face and things, and you learn from those and you put them in place.
This never goes out of fashion, I guess. This proximity to the customers, even being CEO, right?
Yeah, well, it's one of my non-negotiables, really. I think I've always been very, very customer focused, and all my businesses that I've built have been built around fantastic customer support and service. And I think that's so important. I think it's important, for word of mouth, for retention, and in this kind of social world that we live in, social media now. One bad review, you almost can undo a lot of. You could have 20 good reviews, but one bad one. One's going to focus on that bad one. So I think it's so important that you've got to be. We talk a lot about sort of 5-star service. Internally, and the wow factor we talk about a lot. Nice. And we want to give people a wow experience.
Amazing. Excellent. Right. Since we talked about customers, let's actually talk about CIVO, right? Could you provide the simplest explanation or elevator pitch for someone who's hearing about CIVO Cloud for the first time?
Yeah, sure.
No pressure.
The very short answer is we're a cloud provider. Mm-hmm. And in some ways, we're much like the hyperscalers, but we've got a very clear focus on reducing complexity and reducing cost. And I think, I'm sure there's a lot I know there is tons of surveys and research out at the moment that complexity is growing out of control in cloud computing and Kubernetes and other services around that. And then cost is growing out of control. And cost is actually the number one thing on when the companies have been surveyed recently as the biggest challenge that the companies are facing, and CIOs and CTOs are facing at the moment. So I think our clear vision is to reduce cost and complexity, and there's a number of other things that sit underneath that. But as an elevator pitch, that's our focus, is to bring fairness, transparency in pricing, predictable pricing, and reducing that complexity and cost.
Interesting. And it's one of the favorite cloud providers for Kubernetes workloads as well, as I hear.
That's right. Yeah, we definitely we were born into a cloud native world, so where some of the AWSs of this world, they were born into virtualization, which wasn't really designed for the cloud. When we came along, we went cloud native first. We went Kubernetes first, and Kubernetes underpins all of our other services. We even have an infrastructure as a service offering, which is plain old VMs, but that's underpinned by KubeVirt. So we still actually run Kubernetes under the hood and VMs within Kubernetes. Okay. So even our VM story is Kubernetes is cloud native in that. So that's something that's very different. The way we've architected our platform is very much built into that world of cloud native, platform engineering, automation. And,
nice.
I think it's been to our advantage than maybe 10 years ago when a lot of those kind of tools and automation and things were a lot harder to come by.
Indeed.
And I think sometimes I imagine that some of the other providers are fighting against legacy code, legacy ways of doing things, and so we were born into that cloud native future. Kind of gives us an advantage.
Nice. Thanks for the explanation. It was very clear. And now that we introduced CIVO Cloud, that's also a good segue to my next question, because at CIVO Navigate recently, you mentioned that the cloud is broken. So what exactly did you mean by that? Did you mean that the initial cloud computing promise is broken somehow?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've spoke about this on numerous occasions. Definitely at CIVO Navigate, where I was doing a keynote there. And I think you go back to when, I think it was around 2012, AWS pretty much defined what we know as cloud computing back then. And obviously they're still the market leader today. But the promise back then was this kind of world where cloud computing would give us cost savings and make it easier, and then we could do it ourselves. That was the promise that Andy Jassy, who was the CEO back then, he stood up on stage at reInvent, AWS reInvent, and he promised people that this kind of future of lower cost, more flexibility, that kind of stuff. But I think you fast forward to today, and all we see is price rise after price rise. We've got to a point where there's so many products, there's so many complexities, so many hidden charges and things that you just can't. You have to you have to pay companies, consultants, vast amounts of money to make sense of your AWS bills, or your Google or your Microsoft bills. They're just so complex. We've got this FinOps world now of software that's being produced to try and make sense of these bills. I'm trying to think, how did we get to this point?
Exactly.
I remember a world when the early days of hosting is that you used to, you build, the website, it'd be some HTML files and maybe some PHP scripts and those things, and you just FTP them to your hosting provider. Yeah. And then if you weren't happy or they weren't providing a good service or a good level of performance, or I could take those files, I could just move them elsewhere. Things were simple. You had this kind of interoperability between providers that was simple. Yeah. Now we're kind of in this world where we've got, this vast complexity, and I argue by design, lots of proprietary technology that locks people in, and it's very hard to leave. We've got, extortionate egress fees and things like that. So if you did want to leave and take your data with you, it's going to cost you a lot of money. And I think a lot of this stuff is by design. And we've also got the cost increases that we're seeing year on year, which are above inflation. And I think for that reason, there's already surveys from people like IDC that I think 71% of companies plan in the next 2 years to move some or all of their workloads away from cloud. And I think cloud is in a really bad name because of that reason. And I think that's the bit that frustrates me, because cloud offers a lot of benefits. The fact that you don't have to rack servers up anymore.
Yeah.
You don't have to place orders and wait for them for 3 months to wait
Exactly.
for the 𝗕HP box. You don't have to cable it up. You don't have to worry about so much security and all the network config and all those kind of things. And also you've got almost infinite scale, so if suddenly your business grows fast, you can scale on demand.
Right away.
Start small as a startup and grow, all those kind of benefits that the cloud gives you. But now I get the feeling that people are starting to leave the cloud for cost reasons, not necessarily because it's the wrong tool for the job.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's broken. And I think, to be honest about it, I think hyperscalers have had it too much their own way for too long. And so those trying to, we are being a challenger that is defying those norms. And we're looking to have, more transparency of cost, more predictable pricing, less complexity, more freedom of movement. We're backing open standards and things like that.
Yeah. So we're talking monopoly, spiraling costs. But for you, what does it mean to you, cloud fairness and neutrality, if you had to define those values?
For me, it's about opening up a multi-cloud future. And this goes back to what I was saying, almost like the FTP. I used to be able to upload files and move around at will. And quite often, the kind of the words multi-cloud are kind of bandied around as, this multi-cloud future. But it's never really become a thing. And most companies will lock themselves into one provider, and when all the costs escalate, they will lock themselves even more, because the only way they can control the costs is end up signing longer term contracts for committed spends, and they're even more locked in.
Yeah, spending more.
Yeah. And so, I believe in a world where we should have this freedom of movement. And I think, CIVO should be held to account like any other provider. If we're not the best, if we're not performing, if our uptime is poor or our customer service is bad, then people should have a right to move to another provider. Now, that keeps me on my toes and making sure that we provide a good service at all times.
Definitely.
And we compete on the things that the customers want: performance, reliability, cost, things like that, not because they feel locked in. So, my vision for the future and what I'm sort of campaigning a lot and lobbying for is more of an open cloud, where we have more standards-based APIs and things, where you can seamlessly move between providers, less proprietary technology.
Yeah.
And I think removing things like egress fees and things like that stop people being able to move. And I also believe that we should be in a world where companies should work with multiple providers. I'm not always saying CIVO is the best provider for the job. Every workload is different.
Yeah.
And, there's things that the hyperscalers do well. There's things that CIVO do well. Yeah. There's products they've got that we haven't got, and I think there's size of workloads, there's test workloads and non-production and things like that. There's all these different types of things. And I don't believe it should be a one size fits all.
Yeah.
Some of those can even be on-prem, some should be in the cloud.
Yeah. And hybrid, private.
That's the future, a hybrid multi-cloud world where we're not just putting everything in the same box.
I like the sound of that. Fairness, openness, and transparency seem to be the core values. And I totally agree to what you just said. And now it's time to dig a little bit more for some cloud traps. So my first and usual suspect is egress fees. My question is, why aren't TSPs free egress truly free? Sometimes you hear about the recent announcements of the big three, where they say that the egress fee is now free, but there's actually a catch, because it's only free if you leave definitely. So if you break up with them, you're free to leave. But if you have some data that flows, as you said, between a cloud and another, because the company could not actually leave completely the cloud, but they acquire new companies that are in different cloud providers, then the egress fee is not free anymore, right? Can you expand on the first, maybe for the audience, the different type of data movement costs, because we have the intra-region, extra, and then the one-time exit that I just mentioned.
Yeah, I think there's a misconception sometimes, because the hyperscalers do a good PR job sometimes to confuse things and make it sound like things are free when they're not, and that kind of stuff. But firstly, if you're using their service, you have to pay the egress fees for the data transfer that you use. You've always got to pay for them. CIVO actually, for our for services running in CIVO, there's no data transfer, there's no fees. The complete egress is free all the time. So there's a difference there. First of all, there's an inflated charge, very high charge for egress fees when you're running workloads in the hyperscale providers. The second part is obviously when companies want to leave, and historically fees would be charged when companies want to leave a hyperscaler to take their data with them, and again charged at the same kind of heavily inflated fees for leaving. And what's happened recently, because of I think mostly because of Europe and the investigations going on in the UK in terms of monopolies and investigations for anti-competitive behaviours.
I see.
The hyperscalers have said, okay, well, look, we need to do something because we're going to get the book thrown at us if not. So they've come out with this kind of watered down sort of version of, if you want to leave us, firstly, you have to contact us to tell us why you want to leave us. It's not kind of, you can just leave and take your data for free. You have to, again, go through a process of
call support,
understand what it is. Now, they're going to try and talk you out of it. They're going to possibly even try and throw some sort of free credit where, why don't you just try us for another couple of months? Yeah. We'll give you some free, we'll improve, we'll do this.
Coercion.
So you're going to have to go through a very slick process. I'm sure they've advised that you can never leave.
Yeah.
And then even if you then manage to get past that, it's in the small print, it says it's at their discretion. So it's not saying they will waive the fees, it's at their discretion. So they can still turn around and say, well, no.
Yeah.
And like you said as well, I think certainly one or two of them are saying that you have to leave forever. You can never come back.
Yeah. And you got 60 days or something.
Yeah. You can't just take some workloads out. You've got to take
everything.
Yeah. As well. So it doesn't come without all these caveats attached to it. And I think that's the bit we're talking about. There's a lack of transparency because they're not completely honest about leaving. They're making it hard. And then secondly, it is with caveats. You cannot truly leave with no cost. There is a cost to it.
Yeah. That's crazy, because I've done some comparison between the hyperscalers, egress fees. We just mentioned like the different type of movements between regions. So areas there are egress fees between availability zones. So within one region, you got to pay for the egress fee, even if it's the same region between one data center and the other. And outside the region, that's maybe 200 gigs per month. The only hyperscaler that I saw giving more was Oracle, that gives 10 terabytes per month for free. But all the other providers, not so much. You only see the small providers like you guys, where like the egress fee is not something that has to be under review, or like you got to read the fine print at the end to understand exactly what the egress fee means. Right. But I feel like it reminds me of the internet back in the days when we used to pay for the amount of gigs that we consume and upload and download. But nowadays it's unlimited, right? So I feel like we're back at it again, where they try to sort of monetize that transfer.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing at the moment is that organic growth of net new customers for hyperscale providers has really slowed. And they're obviously under pressure every quarter to hit, quarterly earnings targets to keep the shareholders happy in a public, market.
Gotcha.
So what happens at that point is that they're starting to extract, more from their existing customers through, what we call, nickel and diming, and just looking for every tiny little cost that they can find and squeeze in that. And I think that's why we're seeing so many price increases. And it's not just price increases, there's newer charges coming in. I know AWS announced charging for IP addresses beginning of the year. And I think that was estimated to give them an extra $1 billion of revenue by charging these kind of these IP addresses. And I sometimes imagine almost a boardroom in AWS or one of the other hyperscalers where they're kind of going, we've got to keep the shareholders happy this month. We've got to hit our earnings.
What's next?
Which lever should we pull? Should we pull this lever to the left here? That we're going to increase this fee and earn us an extra $500 million, or should we pull this one over here that's is for $750 million if we charge it? And then if everyone's locked in and they can't get out, and the migration's so complicated to get out, because they'd have to re-architect their applications around all the different APIs and things, they end up staying, and they're trapped in that way. So I think they're
captive.
This kind of, it's a vicious circle. Which Kubernetes kind of offers the hope of standardization and open standards, but there's so much other stuff that's wrapped around Kubernetes, the IAM policies and the custom firewall way of doing things, and the Terraform, the different way and the amount of resources that an AWS Terraform provider might have to a CIVO one, and they don't map one to one. So you can't just throw that away and then start. You have to throw it away and start again. You can't just map it. So it's very, very hard to leave as well. I've
seen one of your posts lately in LinkedIn or Twitter, where you talked about the ongoing project of removing anything related to cloud providers on tree of Kubernetes, which is actually getting to the end, like the future version. Maybe was it 132, where there would be stripping of anything related to cloud providers?
Yeah, that was a really big announcement. I think it's a really big step forward that we know. Certainly in the early days of Kubernetes, there were so many drivers and things that were very, custom for each provider. And we've moved things like storage CSI, which is a common standard now, that the way we communicate to storage providers within each cloud company. And it just means that that's, again, when you move, you can just use the same CSI driver to access the CIVO storage that you do for the AWS or Google storage.
Got it.
So it's great that that's come out now, and that's a great, a fantastic step forward.
Indeed.
And I think that where we've got challenges still is more about common APIs, common Terraform resources and things like that. I think that's the next big thing that needs to be attacked.
But it's a good win still.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. Oh, so my second suspect is as cloud traps is obviously the infamous free credits. A lot of startups love free credits, but how bad are they? And why should we care?
Yeah, well, I think we should probably care for a couple of reasons. I think, firstly, that when you look at market share, especially of big three, because of you have these huge amounts of free credits given out.
Yeah.
It's completely unfair against challengers, and smaller companies than CIVO that don't have the funds to give out free credits. And when one of the hyperscalers is offering $500,000 of free credits,
it's crazy,
and a challenger is not able to offer barely anything, why would they ever choose the smaller provider? Like it's anti-competitive by nature, and I think if it comes back to that. If we want to kind of have a fairer ecosystem and opening it up, then as an industry, we need to correct that.
Yeah.
Now, I appreciate as well, it's great having these startup credits, but at the same time, as part of the greater good, if you don't break the cycle, we'll never get people out of the trap of, all the costs and all the money that's extracted later and then being trapped in the ecosystems that are not open.
Yeah.
If we don't solve that problem. So, and there's no such thing as a free lunch.
No.
You're going to pay the price at some point.
Yeah.
And you're going to pay it 10 times over, so be careful what you wish for, sometimes, in that regard. And I think what we need really is that, I'm not saying we ban free credits. I think we need to get them into levels that it's an amount enough for companies to start them off, to grow, to support them, but not so much that, because I think, when I think about this, I think people see the highlights of the numbers. 500,000 of free credit.
Yeah, that's all they see.
When you're building a business and you just need a database and a web page and a basic dashboard and whatever it might be, you're not going to need 500,000 credits.
Exactly.
And you're not. I think what ends up happening is people running out. They only last for a certain amount of period. They run out of time before they run out of money.
Yeah.
The credits are expiring on X day, and you haven't used them, because most startups won't use them that amount. So sometimes it's the headlines that grabs people of the money that's on offer, and they grab it thinking, well, I'm sure I'm going to be using all these different Amazon services in the future, and then we're going to do edge computing, and we're going to do IoT, and we're going to start a 5G tower somewhere, and we're going to do this and that. And we're going to need those credits. But 90% of companies don't need those level of credits. And they're enticed by the big numbers. So for me, it's about giving out credits still, but regulating the level of them. And I don't know what it's like in Canada or in the US and places, but in the UK we have quite a big gambling industry in terms of placing bets on sports matches. And there's a lot of advertisements on the TV that you get your first free bet. You get your first bet for free, and they will give you £50 for free or £100 for free. And they all do it. There's 10 or 15.
Yeah, it's like drug dealers. They do that on the corner of the streets too. They give you a little bit just enough to hook you up.
Yeah, imagine if a new company came along and said, "Get your first bet free. We'll give you £1 million bet free or a £500,000 bet free." You would go with that company every time, because they're giving you this, huge amount of money to kind of and it would be completely unfair, and in that way, and it wouldn't be regulated because it's gambling. They would never allow it. But I mean, it's when you look at that example of any hyperscale company going into an industry and just buying what I call baiting customers. They literally bait them in, and then trap them. It's kind of very well thought out and clever.
Bait and switch.
And there's a lot of proprietary tech in there. There's a lot the egress fees that stop you as well. There's a lot of reasons to stop you, but it's a trap.
Yeah.
It is ultimately a trap. And I don't think it's good for anyone to have, we should open this up and make it a fairer ecosystem, because that will bring the challenges in. Mm-hmm. That will have more market share to be challengers. And that also means that it becomes a lower risk, because if something bad should happen to a hyperscaler, and we've seen, what happened recently with Microsoft and the cybersecurity incident, companies and, was it Delta Airlines and, was offline for like 3 days and pretty much, huge amount of companies were offline for 24, 48 hours. We're putting all our eggs in baskets with 3 providers. Yeah. If something bad happens to these providers, it has not just an impact on people's businesses and livelihoods, but it has a nationwide impact on economies, on wider impacts, and hospitals and military and all sorts of things that we buy these services through. Yeah. So it's probably better that we spread our risk with more providers than put our eggs in one basket with 3 companies. True.
Wise words. And of course, it's like those free trials that you that hook you in and difficult to cancel, and before you know it, you end up paying for something you don't even need. So we've seen it already. Okay, so but it's not all doom and gloom, though, as there's maybe a way, as you said, to level the playing field. Tell me, how can regulations ensure cloud fairness in your opinion? Example, in UK or Europe, we got DMA, we got European Data Act, you got CMA in UK. How can they impact cloud fairness and address anti-competitive practices, do you think?
Yeah, well, firstly, I want to stay on the record that I'm not a big fan of over-regulation.
Okay.
I don't think we should go crazy.
That was my follow-up question, by the way, but keep going.
But it's, I think generally companies should be free to kind of, do what they want to do, and be creative, but not to a point where it's kind of anti-competitive, where a new company could just never compete. It just almost impossible.
Yeah.
It's because we're talking about some of the absolute biggest companies in the world.
Yeah.
And so I think with the things like cloud credits, I think that's an obvious one that is completely unfair.
Yeah.
I think why is there any harm in regulating if someone wants to leave? In how many industries, where someone's not happy, can they not leave to find another company to do the same job? And we're not talking about when they're within a contract. We're talking about people who are paying on demand that can't leave because they have to, take their data with them, and that costs a lot of money. So they're out of contract, really. They're not in a contract, but they can't leave because these costs are like crazy. And how many other industries don't allow us to, move freely if our contract is up to say, I can take what I've got and move it to someone else, and suddenly someone's going to charge you to leave.
Yeah.
And I think opening that up would be something that's really fair, and it's just an obvious. And I just think of the consumer, I think of the people that are consuming the products. What's the downside to these things? Why shouldn't the regulators open that up and make it fairer in those egress fees? There's no downside to the consumer.
Not at all.
If we make more open APIs, common APIs, what's the downside? It gives them choice. It gives them more control. Yeah. And I think that currently, the power and the control is with the cloud provider, not with the customer. And I see a world where the power should be with the customer, who gets to choose for each individual workload where they should host it. That might be with hosting with two providers. I hope one of them CIVO, because we do a good job. But I wouldn't be proud of doing work where we're not doing a good job and we're holding someone against their will because they can't ever leave.
That's monopoly.
I like to think that ultimately whatever action is taken is done in the best interest of moving more power to the user, to the consumer, to the company.
Agree. I totally agree. All right, now I told you I had a follow-up question, and just to level up or balance a bit your opinion on regulation, my next question is about the fact that some people may say that too much regulation sometimes kills innovation. At what time you've seen or still see this happening, even in Europe, for example? You probably heard about AI Act led by the controversial, I'm not going to chop his name because I'm good in French, Thierry Breton. Does it hinder European AI startups, for example, compared to the US? Or do you think AI progress is now skipping Europe? Do you think that's stifling innovation?
Yes, I do. I think we had a talk at our Navigate Berlin conference. We had another keynote with Frank Tellen, who's an AI investor, a tech investor, German. So a lot of investment in European companies, and also he was on the German version of the Shark Tank as well. So he's kind of fairly well known, and he's very frustrated by the European Cloud Act and the fact that he does believe it will stifle innovation and it will hold Europe back in that way. So I think that is definitely a great example. And, the UK are still, for instance, formulating their kind of AI regulations and things. And I hope there's some lessons learned from what Europe have done and they get the balance right. And I think the key is balance. I think that is the key word. And the same in the US, and because it will. I think there's so many benefits that AI can bring us. There's a lot of dangers as well. Yeah. Of course, we have to protect that. We have to also protect copyright and those kind of things as well for people that have spent a lot of time in their lives and their careers building content and things. Yeah. But it's getting the balance right. I think you can never fight progress. You can't fight against moving forward and technology advancement. And as much as we try, if we over-regulate it, it's going to, like you say, other countries, other areas will progress faster, and actually we could miss out on real human benefits that we don't see because we've overregulated something that could have life-changing consequences as well.
Yeah.
So the balance needs to be right. I've definitely seen it in other industries as well, where overregulation has become bureaucratic, has meant that so much process, so many hoops to jump through, to make it difficult to run a business and succeed and those kind of things as well. So I think the US is probably one of the easiest places, I think, in any business to start without overregulation. I think in Europe, UK has got more and more and more regulation. I think obviously UK's broke away a little bit, partly for that reason, because there were lots of European laws that were coming in that the UK didn't necessarily agree with, but had to comply with. Now the UK's broken away a bit. It'll be interesting to see where they go, with things like the AI Act and other things as well. So, but yeah, my view is I don't like over-regulation, but we need some regulation and a balance.
True. And by the way, even some leaders of Europe are starting to speak related to this overregulation in terms of AI. I actually read a comment from Macron from France, who warned Europe of the risks of overregulating and that could impact their progress. So it's pretty a vivid topic right now, and apparently on the lips of a lot of leaders nowadays. All right, now let's shift gears for a moment and talk about alternatives. Can smaller cloud providers really compete with the likes of Amazon, Microsoft, and Google? Because they're pretty deep pocket to compete with. What challenges, roles do you see smaller independent cloud providers like CIVO playing in the future of cloud landscape?
Yeah, well, ourselves, we're making waves and we're taking market share bit by bit. We're not, I'm not saying we're taking like 10% overnight or anything, but we're chipping away, and people are, I think our message and the way we conduct our business is resonating with people. We have got that fairness, that transparency on pricing and that predictability on pricing. And I don't think we're alone in that. I think there are other challenges out there that are doing a good job as well. And I think that's good, because I think it, for me...
Takes a village.
Yeah, I think, we're all fighting the same battle, really, in terms of something has to be done, in my opinion. Yeah. And the more people that are, following a similar path to us, is the better. And I said, it all comes back to the consumer for me, is that why do we want complexity in our lives? Why does anyone want complexity in our lives? Yeah. And if we can make things easier, if we can reduce, the financial burden and have more transparency in billing and things like that, and we can have this more freedom of movement, I don't see the downside to it from a consumer's point of view. So anyone that's pushing similar messages to us, that's trying to change cloud for the better, and that's why I say it's broken, it won't be fixed until we do see a real change. Yeah. And those people that are carrying the same values and integrity that CIVO does, I'm all for that.
Great. Ever heard of a little sister company, the retail company that has a sister company called Schwarz Digit? Came out of the blue, and in the last year they made $1.9 billion in annual sales with 7,500 employees, which is nuts. Have you heard of that success story recently?
Yeah, I did hear about it. Yeah, and I think that's, again, I think diversifying, having all eggs in one basket, is not a good thing. If you think about economies or countries and where we have vast monopolies, it's just a very dangerous place to be. So I think success stories like that are good. The more diversification we can have, the better.
Perfect. And for example, CIVO, what does CIVO do differently? I know about you have a differentiator where you make it really financially interesting, because you actually have a control on transparency of the cost, but you do have to make money somehow. So how do you reconcile, being so transparent and so cheap and also make money?
Yeah, the good thing, I've been in hosting for 25 years and I think I've taken a lot of that experience, and we've learned to negotiate very good deals on things. We buy our own hardware as well. We're not hosting on anyone else's infrastructure, so we own everything. We buy the infrastructure. We built all our own software from the ground up. Some of that obviously leverages open source components, but we're not buying storage software from anyone. We're not buying any expensive firewalls or network kind of stuff. Everything we do is software defined. So we keep our costs very, very low in that sense of not paying all high licensing costs and costs for software and things like that. So that's one thing. But I think it's kind of a bit of a myth that the hyperscalers quite often are perceived as, or I guess they like you to be perceived that they're cheap and they cost value for money, but their margins are huge.
Yeah.
True. AWS is, don't quote me exactly, but it's like their most profitable division of the whole of Amazon, and by far it's and compared to retail and other things as well, it makes a huge amount of profit. Oh, yeah. I think there's that myth that these are low margin businesses. It actually goes back to what Andy Jassy actually said in his reInvent talk. He said that at the time he compared Amazon to big giant tech companies at the time, which were probably your IBMs and your HPs and people like that. And he talked about their higher gross margins and of being 70-80%. But ironically, that's what the hyperscale margins are at nowadays. Wow. Because they've done so many price increases. So I think where CIVO's at is that our gross margins might not be quite as high, but we're still able to operate a nice margin, but still provide it at a much lower cost. So
amazing.
That end-to-end ownership, obviously, of all the infrastructure and all the software helps that as well.
That's very smart. I get it now. Very elegant way of making everybody happy. Right on. Now, I would like to have your take on the big elephant in the room, which is the growing carbon footprint of mega data centers and AI superclusters. Because today, cloud computing emissions are ranging up to 3.7%, exceeding the aviation industry emissions at 2%, which is insane. My question is, could we meet AI energy needs without blowing out the climate goals we hear about every year during the COP events? How should the industry tackle sustainability, especially for AI growth?
Yeah, I definitely think it's a worrying problem. And already there's been, reports of some of the big three missing all their emission targets that they promised people by quite a way. And I believe they've, openly admitted it's down to AI growth because they've been constructing so many data centers and things, and it's all the materials and all the emissions that go into building these vast data centers have meant that the emissions are spiraling out of control. So it looks like a lot of these companies are going to miss them, and there's almost a what the other thing that's happening is the knock-on effects. There's one thing about the clean energy and clean air and things that we all want and we all crave, but also there's bigger impacts to or wider impacts rather than bigger impacts to housing projects and things. I know specifically in the UK, in Dublin, in Ireland as well, housing projects have been cancelled because of hyperscale data centers have been built. They've consumed majority of the power, and it's meant there's no power to build housing in those areas.
Wow.
So bad, I believe, in Dublin that there wasn't enough energy to even power the Microsoft data center, and the data center currently runs on diesel generators, partly.
Natural gas.
Which was originally billed as probably a very energy efficient, carbon neutral data center or whatever, is now running on generators. But at the same time, it took all the power, and it meant that there's a bit of a housing shortage in Dublin because they can't get power to homes. So there's wider impacts than just purely saying the clean air or the climate change and things like that, which are obviously really important. But people are seeing impacts even now, from that. And I think it's going to get worse because there's a lot of predictions of the power could double within 2 years, from AI growth and things like that. And hyperscalers are in a way, monopolizing the power. That they're buying power stations now, nuclear power stations.
Exactly.
Making investments.
I heard about that, yes.
It's kind of like, where does that leave things for everyone else? Because if they monopolize all the power, where does that again leave all the
rest of the society?
Society. Where does it leave the other cloud providers? Where does it leave builders and home builders and all these other companies and hospitals or whatever it might be? But sometimes all consumed with just build, and just get AI out there as quick as we possibly can because obviously it's very money motivated, but without really stopping to think about the wider impacts of these things. And we will pay the price, and at some point it will come to a head. And again, maybe that's where regulation has to get involved in a bit in that respect. But again, it's a balance. It's not over-regulation, but someone needs to hold people accountable. They're going to say they're going to hit this climate change target, and they miss it by X%, which are quite large percentages. No one's holding them accountable to that. Yet governments are still granting them, new permits to build data centers, even when they're missing all these targets and are effectively, misleading people. Yeah,
because we're talking about future 1 gigawatt foundries of superclusters coming soon, right? And this is not a really trivial environment in the industry. And we hear a lot about ESG, which is responsible investing. We also hear about some companies conflating this with greenwashing that they just put on the banner of their website just to get away with it.
Yeah.
What's your take on this?
Yeah, I think it's not where we should be for sure. And I think it's very easy for companies to throw out, we're going to be carbon neutral by X time. Like, because it's so far in the future sometimes, always. It's not so far, but by 2030,
I won't be there.
And then you get to 3 years away and you go, oh yeah, we're a bit behind on time. We'll be 2035 and kick it down the line a bit more. Just about keep your head under the radar to not get a big slap on the wrist, or a public shaming. So there is definitely a lot of narratives, a lot of messaging that's going out there to be looked to be seen as doing the right thing. I always think this is an afterthought. These companies got big without sometimes at all thinking really about sustainability, and it's back to the boardroom saying, "Oh, we need to make sure we look good in the public eye. What do we need to do? Well, let's set a figure. Like, we're going to be carbon neutral by X amount of time. That will appease everyone. That'll get all the shareholders off our back.
Plant some trees.
That will do it. But it should be baked in really, and it was part of our DNA from the start that we said we're going to buy carbon neutral data centers wherever possible. Unfortunately, some countries you cannot buy 100% renewable energy. But places we're buying as much 100% renewable as possible, which is the majority.
Great.
We've got a partnership with Deep Green in the UK where we're using GPUs, heat reuse from GPUs to heat public swimming pools and giving the heat back. So that's actually even better than carbon neutral because we're actually using the heat to do good.
Super cool.
This is the cloud provider of the future. We're trying to set the benchmark. I'm not saying we're the only ones doing things, but I think we need to do more as an industry and bake this in as part of the DNA rather than the afterthought to kind of greenwash and make ourselves look good publicly. It needs to be part of your values, as a company.
Interesting. And that's very commendable, by the way. Right. So we talked already about enshittification. Good. Meanwhile, this industry is full of challenges, but one of them seems to be often avoided by big tech companies. And I'm thinking of accountability during global outages. I want your take on CrowdStrike's outage and how it was handled. Was it enough, in your opinion? Could they have done more? Beyond the 𝗕𝗵𝗄 award acceptance, how should cloud providers handle accountability, and how do you at CIVO handle this?
I guess the first word, I've used it a lot, is transparency. I think being open and honest about things is, I think, generally most people do have empathy. I think a lot of people realize that these things are never done on purpose. These things happen. We live in a complex world in technology and lots of moving parts. And any cloud provider, any technology provider, anyone that says that their stuff will never fail, are lying. It will fail at some point. There's no such thing as 100% uptime guarantee. And if someone sells that to you, you should probably run a mile. So I think transparency is the first thing, and I think Cloudflare always do a pretty good job as a company that springs to mind, and they're very open and honest. And if there's been, I think there's been some where there's been some human error involved and things like that. They're very open to say, look, it was a human error, but this is what we're doing to fix it, and put the safeguards in place. It won't happen again. This particular thing can't happen again because we've done all this and this and this and this. And that means, actually, they do care. They've been open. They care. They're going to fix it. They almost apologise. They're sorry about it.
Interesting.
And I think, I guess with the CrowdStrike one, I didn't, to be honest, read so much about the fallout. But I can comment heavily. But I know there was it felt like bad taste. Wasn't there some donations of a very small amounts of money to companies, like $100 or something? Did I read?
Yeah.
To kind of almost say, but that was just adding insult to injury. What if that was true? What I read about them just giving a credit of $100 or whatever it was. That the company's lost thousands, tens of thousands, millions, hundreds of millions in the case of Delta or whatever it was, and that just felt a bit wrong. What I read about that. But,
I think they removed it after at some point.
Did they?
Well, I think. I may not be sure, but I've heard about them just retracting from showing off with those few $100s.
So I think it should go right to the top. I've not had any major incidents, but certainly where I've sent an email to every customer apologising for an incident or and really holding my hands up and saying we can do better. And I've certainly done that once or twice in my career. And so I think it has to be genuine. It has to go to the top and be honest and open.
The thing I have an issue with CrowdStrike in terms of reaction of the CEO is he said, this is not a breach, it's an outage. So I had issues with it because the impact is still as big when it's an outage than when it's a breach, because we know CrowdStrike is a security solution, but in the meantime, it doesn't make a day better for the customer, whether it's a breach or an outage.
Yeah, I do remember reading that actually. I guess because they're a security company, they don't want to have the line to be they've been breached, but it's probably done in the wrong way. It's probably done
communication. You mean?
There's a way of communicating that to say, technically, it's not a breach, but almost saying we understand it's just as materially impactful as if we had had a breach, and the effects of it are the same almost. But we certainly get enough eyes on it to make sure that we have a balanced view of what should be going out in the right way. And I don't know, maybe they were ill-advised of.
I don't know.
Because it all comes down to share price, doesn't it? Yeah, the PR companies probably, and some of the top shareholders are saying, don't say breach, don't say breach.
Don't say breach, Crazy. Cool. Well, it's time to bring this home. So I'd love to give you a chance to share where listeners can connect with you, whether online or on socials. And finally, what's the key takeaway you want to leave to the audience related to today's talk?
Yeah, you can find CIVO at 𝗧𝗵𝗲. You can find me on Twitter or X as it's called now. My DMs are open.
Great.
And that's probably the best place to get in contact with me quickly and easily. And final thoughts. I guess, you probably already know from this talk, I'm very passionate about changing the face of cloud in a positive way to open it up. And to bring some more challenges in, to make it a fairer level playing field and ultimately be a better cloud landscape for the consumer, for the people buying the product. So that's my part of my, I want to kind of leave a bit of a legacy of in my own small or big way, depending on how we look at it in 10, 15 years time or whenever, to say that I was actually someone that drove real change, and maybe perhaps force the big guys to kind of come around to our way of thinking. And that can only be a good thing for the consumer.
Love it. Love it. I love the messaging in terms of tech fairness, leveling that playing field, coming from the mouth of a CEO of a cloud provider, and all what you've been advocating for all these years is really, really refreshing to hear. And for the record, it took me months to get Mark Boost on the hot seat, but I'm super happy and glad we could finally make it and talk about topics that are so timely and dear to all of us in the industry. Thanks a lot, Mark. You've been widely entertaining, and we've learned a ton from you today. Your insights into the cloud industry and your journey as well as a serial entrepreneur are truly inspiring. I'm sure the audience has a lot to take away from this conversation. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. And please come back anytime, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Cheers. Cheers, Mark. And cut. If you like this episode, please share the word, leave a comment, drop a like, subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, LinkedIn, everywhere. That'll mean the world to us. Thank you. You're listening to TechBeats Unplugged, and I'm your host, Cloud Dude. Catch y'all next time. Peace.